When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be talking about the fate of the Wildlings, not only in the Winds of Winter, but also by the end of the series. And right now, there's only a couple pockets of actual Wildlings left that we know of from George. Most of that information comes from A Dance with Dragons and where they are at, and then the rest of it we're going to have to speculate in terms of what we do have with the Wildlings. So I want to go through, detail where all of the Wildlings that we know of currently are, and the impact that that will play in the story. So the first two pockets of Wildlings are Wildlings that we've seen the most of through Jon's POV. We see one of those factions of Wildlings actually come south of the wall, bend the knee to Stannis, accept R'hllor, all that type of stuff. So that's the first faction. That would be like I would say the Val faction, for instance. The second faction that we see is the faction that comes with Tormund south of the wall towards the middle to end part of A Dance with Dragons, when they come south through the wall with Jon's permission. So those are two of the factions of Wildlings that we have that we've seen the most of. Now there's a third faction that is linked to Jon's POVs in A Dance with Dragons, and that faction is at Hardhome. They are there, and Jon is trying to save them with Stannis' ships and things like that. Now, that is not going well at all. We actually hear a report from Cotter Pike from Eastwatch and the journey of going to Hardhome to get the Wildlings that there are things in the water, and there are wights in the trees, and things like that. The others seem to be attacking Hardhome during the time of these messages, or at least something similar to what we saw on the television show, with Hardhome basically being completely wiped out. That is what it seems like is in progress right now. We also do know another thing, that some of the Wildlings from Hardhome were taken and were put into slavery, or at least were being attempted to be sold, but were caught in Bravos. We see this through Arya's POV as well. And the last faction of Wildlings that we know of currently right now in the story is actually trying to get past Shadow Tower to the far west of the wall. So the Wildlings are quite spread out. You have some in the far east north of the wall, far to the west, and then some that have just basically gotten to Castle Black and are being spread out throughout the wall, some of the Wildlings being used to man the wall as a whole. So at this point, what do we think the fate of the Wildlings is going to be? Will they be completely annihilated? Will some faction of them survive and go north of the wall after the main story like we saw in the show? What's going to occur? I think it's a little bit of both. I think a lot of the Wildlings will die. I think what remains at Hardhome likely will not be saved. I know Jon had planned to do so and even thought about going and trying to do a land expedition to help the people at Hardhome. This is something that is asked of Jon, because trying to pick up the Wildlings by sea is not working that well, and they request help from Jon. Jon had thought about doing this. He does then get sidetracked, though, because of the pink letter. And so I think personally the people at Hardhome are screwed. I think that I talked about this on stream a little bit. I think it would be a really interesting idea if we all think that more than likely the prologue of the next book is going to have something to do with Jane Westerling and Edmure's party going west with the Lannister escort going to Casterly Rock, that there may be some direwolf attack that happens there. Maybe Brynden and a force of the Brotherhood Without Banners, they take out that force. That seems like where the prologue could very easily be. I would maybe counter that, and this is something I thought about as I was doing my stream with you guys, is I thought it might be a good idea if we actually saw Hardhome happening. Maybe it's through somebody in the Night's Watch. Maybe it's through one of the Wildlings that actually survive Hardhome, and we actually get to see what we kind of saw in the television show. It would really, I think, start out the pacing of A Winds of Winter where it needs to be, right? The others is becoming more of that threat and starting to come south of the wall, as they will probably by the end of the book. So I thought that could be a decent start for Winds of Winter. Now, I do think that Hardhome is screwed. I don't think it makes any sense for Jon to try and save them. It's way more risk than reward. I think that people around Jon are right in terms of Hardhome. Again, you want to save as many people as you can, but at what point does it risk losing the men you have and gaining nothing? And it just seems, in my opinion, not the best move. So I basically have Hardhome down to, okay, maybe a few stragglers make it out. Some of these ships are able to get a few amount of people out. So you even think about the Wildlings that were trying to be sold into slavery. Those Wildlings will still exist to some degree. Let's go then move to the west, where we have these Wildlings trying to get past the wall and are near Shadow Tower. I personally think these Wildlings likely are going to die. That area of the wall is much more difficult to try and pass. It's a terrible journey, and especially when you're working with a limited amount of time with the others being on their tails. I think likely that faction, one of two things will happen to them. Either one of the others will kill them, or they may try and attack the Night's Watch. The Night's Watch will win. I could see maybe a scenario where John tries to, treat with them or allow them to come south of the wall. But I just don't think we have time for that, given what John's plotline is going to look like and all that stuff. You even think about John's not going to be in charge of the wall for probably a good amount of time. I personally just don't see that faction really playing much of a role in the next book. So yeah, you can kind of go with that as you want. So let's then move to the main faction. So the main faction of Wildlings that are south of the wall, that are going to support John. We saw that they rallied behind John to go south to deal with Ramsay in this pink letter situation. It makes the most amount of sense for the Wildlings. Unfortunately for the Wildlings, you're faced with extreme prejudice against them, and they have very few allies. John was one of the few people really trying to push for them and their rights and trying to, utilize them against the others. And so John dies at the end of the book, right? And so the Wildlings, I think, will one help control the wall. I think they will basically take over the watch under people loyal to John and maybe even the Queen's men. And by the Queen's men, I mean Queen Selyse, who is at the wall. That's where I think the beginning of the Wildling story will begin, is them trying to reestablish what happened with John, and they're fighting for the right to live south of the wall. Now, the other part of this that I think is interesting as we move forward is when John does get resurrected, I do think that the Wildlings will go with him. They're going to try to figure out what happened at Winterfell because, again, it's really hard to pinpoint the detail of when does the North or the broad general public realize that Stannis has beaten the Freys at the Battle of Ice, and if he does take Winterfell, at what point is that made known, right? Because Stannis has already foreshadowed he might have this fake rumor that he's going to die. He tells that to Justin Massey in the Winds of Winter sample chapter. So I think it's going to be one of those things where John may think, yeah, he needs to go to battle. We're building up to maybe a Battle of the Bastards, but Stannis has actually already taken the castle, so there's no kind of need. But all that preparation John's been doing will be needed for the war against the others. So him uniting people and stuff will still have a meaning, but not necessarily the meaning that John had thought originally with having to take down Ramsay. And so all of that will come to a head. I think the Wildlings, unfortunately, will mostly die off. I think that a small, fraction of them will live, but I think that they have the most to fight for in terms of fighting the others and trying to reclaim some of their homes north of the wall and going back there later. That unfortunately that puts them in a tough spot where they're going to be on the front lines of defending the north, defending the wall, things of that nature. And you also look at the other side of it is people do not like the Wildlings. They're not going to go to bat for Wildlings' rights. It's really just John at this point. Maybe if you want to say the ones that have converted to Stannis' religion, Selyse and maybe Stannis also would be kind of vying for them to an extent. Even think about Alice Karstark's marriage, where she was marrying a Then, of course, and that was actually looked upon fondly because it was done in the eyes of R'hllor and how they do marriages instead of the normal customs. So I think the issue becomes by the end of the story, I think that the Wildlings will have to go through so much hardship, so much battle behind Jon, fighting for their rights that by the end of it, there may not be a lot of them left for those rights to begin with. And I think that the ending for the show with the Wildlings made the most sense. That after the war is done with the others, if our side of the humans or the living actually win, they go back to their homes, places where they would have grown up and where all of their true people are, and they may even feel that they need to go back because of the way Westeros views them and treats them. I could see all that making sense. But I also think Jon Snow going with them made a lot of sense. He's a man that's going to be completely broken by the events of the normal story. You even think about him dying and what that's going to do to him. I think exile, more or less, is probably it's a happy ending for Jon, but it's not really. And this is something the show didn't really dive into. Is that Jon has so many psychological issues based on a lot of the issues that have going on the entire story that an exile is nice because he gets away from all of the things he's had to go through, but it also means that he has to reflect on everything that's occurred. The death of Ygritte, him being betrayed by his own men of the Night's Watch, realizing what comes after death, if there is anything at all. All those things will plague into a character like Jon, to where it'll be kind of a bittersweet ending for the character of Jon and also the Wildlings because they fought so hard to get south of the wall and for their own rights that in reality they end up really getting pushed out. Maybe it's not like publicly, like they're not being told they have to go live north of the wall, but it's It's that feeling. It's the idea of like when Rhaenyra goes to Dragonstone. It's not because she's being told to go to Dragonstone by Alicent or the Greens. It's because she feels pushed out, right? The court has all their eyes on her, and she feels like Alicent has turned everyone against her. So that to me could apply the same way to the Wildlings, that they just feel that they need to go back. And so that kind of ends the video. Let me know what you guys think about the Wildlings and their fate going further into A Song of Ice and Fire and them as a culture. But I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.